Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Happy Friday to you. Hope you're getting settled in for a good weekend. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. We are jammed-packed today. I'm going to start off the program with something kind of fun. My own personal list of the players this fall that I'm the most intrigued to see for UGA. I'm kind of intentionally going away from quarterbacks on that topic for today. We'll probably do quarterback stuff before we're done on today's show, but I'm kind of intentionally going away from that at the beginning because, frankly, I've got a lot of players that I'm actually more interested in seeing than whatever is going to happen at quarterback between what we presume is JT Daniels and Juan Mathis right now. We'll do that on today's show. Jeff Sentell is here as we go on the road, assisted by AAA. A lot of talk about five-star defensive lineman Mason Smith. I'll even preview some of that with what I thought was an interesting quote from Smith to Jeff that I do think gives you a little bit of insight into maybe how some programs might be, dare you say it, negatively recruiting against Georgia when it comes to Smith. I'll give you an example of that on today's show. There's big news around the SEC with a transfer that's gotten some good news. Obviously, continued frustration for the guys who haven't really heard anything as of yet. We'll preview Brock Vandagriff versus Gunnar Stockton. We will hear from 4 different Georgia players in today's show. When I tell you we're loaded, we are jammed, packed to the rafters, but we couldn't do it if it wasn't for you, and we thank our friends at Kroger as well. So let's get settled in. Let's have some fun. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Good to have you with us here on this Friday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Busy show for us. Some of this is going to be related to recruiting. It's a huge night tonight with five-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff taking on 2022 five-star Gunnar Stockton. We'll preview some of that. There is more interesting stuff out there with five-star defensive lineman Mason Smith. We will cover all of that on today's program. Let me begin with this, and this is kind of just for fun, and this is one of those things where your mileage may vary. This is my own personal list here. If you created your list, yours might look a little bit different, but I start thinking about the start of the season, now just a couple of weeks away. We're getting closer to that, and when you think about the buzz that's been generated, some of this whispers, some of this on the record from Kirby Smart, some of this real stuff, that can be substantiated, some of this just the kind of stuff we assume. The players for the upcoming season that I'm the most excited about seeing, the players that I find the most intriguing because of what might happen based on what they're able to do for Georgia this year. And the list that I'm about to show you doesn't include quarterbacks because, frankly, we've talked about quarterbacks a lot. I didn't intentionally avoid quarterbacks on my list, but when I start thinking about the guys that I'm curious about, I think there are plenty of players on this Georgia roster that are not quarterbacks that I think have potentially fascinating storylines attached to their name this year and, frankly, could break out in a big way. And some of this happening offensively could actually make the job for the quarterback a little easier. The truth is, I'm not really quite sure where this Georgia quarterback thing stands right now. You hear all kinds of stuff. And as I said, we'll probably do some of that before we're done on today's show. But let's talk about something different here for a moment. So here's my list, the 7 players that I'm the most intrigued for seeing for this upcoming year. You may do your own list. And it just so happens that the first 4 names on here are offense, though the last 3 names on here are defense. And the first name on my list here is one we talked about last night on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. I am incredibly fascinated by James Cook this upcoming season. I think that Cook is a guy that maybe Georgia has been guilty of the last couple of years of not using as well as it could. And some of that's been related to this unique, interesting skill set that Cook has. I think it takes a creative mind to get the most out of that. I don't believe that Georgia has had a creative mind working and running the offense the last year or so. I think James Coley's gone for a reason. Now Todd Monken is here. I assume that Monken will be more creative, but as, maybe ironic, as you move towards 2020, I almost get the sense from some of the stuff that I've kind of heard, Del McGee praising James Cook as a leader now of the running back room, as a for instance on all this, that what we're actually heading towards here is not just an example of Georgia getting creative with how it uses James Cook, but also now James Cook kind of becoming a little bit more of a traditional style running back. Still good at catching the football, still elusive, still athletic, still all those things that make him interesting kind of, the all-purpose style back coming out of high school as a recruit, but maybe now a little bit more of a traditional tailback. Mentioned in tandem a lot more with a guy like Georgia running back Zamir White, the way we kind of typically think of Georgia having that, kind of side-by-side, thunder and lightning, whatever you want to call it, but tandem of running backs. Sony Michel, Nick Chubb for a long time, Elijah Holyfield, DeAndre Swift back in 2018. A little less of a tandem last year. Swift got the lion's share of the carries, but maybe back to normal on that in 2020. All of a sudden, James Cook kind of grows in that role in my mind. But he's not the only Georgia player I'm intrigued by seeing. Let me mention a few freshmen on offense here for a moment. We'll show the list on the screen once again. Marcus Rosemy now wants to be known as Marcus Rosemy Jack Saint. We'll honor his wishes on that. I put him at number 2 on my list, and I put Jermaine Burton, the other freshman wide receiver, at number 3. Here's the thing. Last year for Georgia, we saw incredible contributions from freshman receivers. George Pickens was one of the better freshman receivers that Georgia's had in a long time, and by the end of the year, he was also one of the better wide receivers in the SEC all the way around. Dominic Blaylock also had a very good season as well. Of course, Blaylock is now injured, which challenges the 2020 wide receiving core, but you start to wonder, could guys like Rosemy Jack Saint, could a guy like Jermaine Burton, could someone like that do something similar to what the Pickens, the Blaylocks did a year ago? Georgia needs help at wide receiver. Some of the void filled by Dominic Blaylock's absence, I think, will belong to veteran players like Kyrus Jackson and Demetrius Robertson. But the step up, the immediate impact of the two freshman receivers, like I mentioned a moment ago, that to me is a really intriguing storyline for the upcoming season. Georgia being as good as it can be, Georgia being as good as maybe it needs to be to win the SEC, to put itself in college football playoff consideration, I think requires a whole bunch of contributions from a bunch of wide receivers. The veterans I mentioned, obviously you hope and expect George Pickens to have a very good year. And getting a couple of big performances from a couple of those freshmen might also kind of round out that position group as well. I'm very intrigued by Rosemy Jack Saint. Very, very intrigued by Burton right now. I think that's going to be fun. I also put Darnell Washington on my list at number 4. I have said before that Washington is a guy that I'm not sure how much to expect from in his freshman year. I think Washington at the end of his senior year of high school, do you remember back to All-Star season, what was the All-American Bowl that he played in? At that point in time, Darnell was probably tipping the scales at a pretty big total. He's probably in excess of 270 pounds. I think he's been working to get a little smaller here. I think that the level of play in Nevada where he was playing in high school football may have been a little different than, like, say, what a guy like a Rick Gilbert saw at a place like Marietta where he could be the focal point of the offense. I don't know how much of that Washington really got at the high school level in comparison to Gilbert. But there's going to be an additional spotlight on Darnell now, that number 0 on his chest, kind of like a bullseye for a quarterback to throw to. The expectations are that Trey McKitty, because of a knee injury, may not play week 1 against Arkansas. And however long that he's out puts more pressure on the other tight ends. And the most interesting name on that list is Washington, because he was a 5-star, because he's this big, giant athlete. It's just really fun to think about what he might be able to do in a Georgia uniform. We'll obviously pay close attention to that. He's one of my intriguing names. Now, let me mention 3 names on defense here as well. And once again, these are 3 names that came up a little bit last night on our Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. It's 3 of the 5-star signees from the class of 2019, guys who played as freshmen a year ago and were very good. And maybe now, as you move towards the 2020 season on the field, these are guys that have a chance to take that next level, that next step, and be great. I'm going to mention them all 3 all together right here. The defensive lineman, Trayvon Walker, the outside linebacker, Nolan Smith, the inside linebacker, Nakobe Dean. These 3 guys we seem to mention a lot together. And that's not to say, in Nolan Smith's case, that you disregard Jermaine Johnson, disregard Azeez Ojulari. Those guys are also obviously, potentially big-time contributors as well. Heck, Ojulari was already a huge contributor a year ago. He led the team in sacks. But when you think about the high ceiling, the assumption would be that maybe Smith still has a higher ceiling than those guys do. A lot of good defensive linemen at Georgia, but the highest ceiling of that group probably belongs to Trayvon Walker. This is the kind of guy that has the look of a future first-round pick, and maybe this year he starts to play that way. Nakobe Dean, much the same way. I think Georgia's most important inside linebacker is still Monty Rice, no matter how good Nakobe Dean ends up being. Rice is just a great run stopper. That still matters in the SEC. But the ceiling to be a spectacular, fabulous player, you kind of find that with Nakobe in a way that maybe you don't with anybody else in the inside linebacking room. And for the Georgia defense to be the best that it can possibly be, one of those three guys at least, if not maybe more than one if you want to get really greedy here for a moment, but one of those three guys at least really stepping into his own and becoming something of a superstar type player. The other day on the show, we talked about, does Georgia have enough great players? Well, one of those three, Walker, Smith, Dean, stepping up and becoming a truly great player as a sophomore would be a big way to get kind of Georgia where it needs to be here. So that's my 7. 4 names on offense, led by the veteran James Cook. 3 on defense, rising sophomores who have a chance to be great. And as a way of kind of like putting a punctuation mark on this, let me let you hear from a couple of these guys. Up at the top of my list, I had James Cook, running back coming into his own maybe. He talked this week about what it feels like to play with Zamir White, maybe following in the footsteps of other great tandems of Georgia running backs. This is what James Cook said about that.
Everybody else, I mean, just continue to push each other every day and work hard. And I mean, that's about it. Just keep pushing and just keep working together.
So he's obviously excited about the possibility of doing that. You know, James Cook, kind of a man of few words, but pretty clearly energized about the upcoming season here. And one more to hear from the list I just gave you a moment ago. We also had a chance this week to hear from Georgia rising sophomore defensive lineman Trayvon Walker, a guy who showed up at Georgia as a former 5-star. And in the early portion of the season, maybe Georgia was kind of working to find a place for Walker on the field. By the end of the year, he was playing pivotal snaps. He was huge at the end of the Auburn game, for instance. But Trayvon Walker was good enough this week to kind of walk us through his mindset about how it was that he competed for playing time as a freshman and kind of what his thought process was throughout that process as he tried to prove himself as a very young player in this Georgia roster. Here is Trayvon Walker.
Just knowing that I have to go out and work hard every day, knowing somebody like me be carrying in front of me, I had to go out every day, make few errors, stay on top of my game. As long as I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I don't have to worry about what he's doing as long as I'm doing my job.
So listen, I love that mindset from Walker. It was fun to get a chance to hear from him this week. James Cook, much the same way as well. And I gave you my list of my 7. If you've got some intriguing names you'd like to see for yourself, I'd love to hear from you on that as we get ready to enjoy what should be a very fun season coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger. It's good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. So good to have you with us. We'll get Jeff Sentell coming up in just a moment as we go on the road with him today, assisted by our friends at AAA. But I want to give a huge shout-out to our friends at Kroger for making this show possible and also doing great work to keep everybody healthy during what has been a pretty challenging time. And by the way, the challenge doesn't end as we get ready to head into what is the flu season. That is coming up. But listen, Kroger's got you covered on that, so don't take the risk. Go out there, get ready for the flu season, and take advantage of what can be a free flu shot from our friends at Kroger. Kroger's hosting a 3 drive-through flu vaccination flu events, easy for me to say, right, during the month of September. First one takes place Wednesday, September 16th at North Point Community Church in Alpharetta. It's 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then the second and third events are going to be both on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2 different locations. One of those, Gwinnett Church, Hamilton Mill in Buford. Also, Elizabeth Baptist Church in Atlanta. Same time, very easy to remember. It's 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for that. So for more information on the free Kroger drive-thru flu vaccination event, go to this website, the DawgNation homepage. You can look for Kroger on there, and you can find out more details on that. 3 big events, 2 different days, a chance for you to get a free flu vaccination to prepare yourself for the upcoming year. What could be better than that? Obviously, Kroger taking really good care of us throughout the entirety of the last few months, and as we head towards flu season there as well. All right, as I said before, it's Jeff Sentell coming up in a moment. Let me preview Jeff's, though, visit with us as we go around the doghouse here today, delivered by Marco's Pizza. And boy, it is great to have Marco's Pizza back with us here on DawgNation Daily. Around the doghouse, delivered by Marco's Pizza here today. And a lot of what we talk about with Jeff in a couple of moments is going to center around 5-star defensive tackle Mason Smith, an absolute huge name for the class of 2021, and a really exciting thing right now that it seems like Georgia is in pretty good shape to really chase down that commitment for Mason Smith. But sometimes, one of the things I find fascinating, when you hear from a recruit, and Jeff's got 2 really good articles already up with Smith, there's a third one coming today, is sometimes you get a little bit of a window into how prospects like this are being recruited by other programs. Let me read you one quote here from Mason Smith to Jeff Sentell. I think this is an example of this. If you want to kind of get geared up what the recruitment for Mason Smith is going to be like, I think this is a little bit of some enemy intel for what the other side is saying here for a moment. Let me read Mason Smith, who says that the Georgia defensive-wise hasn't put a defensive lineman into the NFL since like 2012, 2013. He means a guy being drafted. But this class will be Trey Scott's first recruiting class going into the draft. We'll see what happens this year, but they are known for a good defense. They are very, very notable program. That's five-star defensive lineman Mason Smith via Jeff Sentell's interview with him at DawgNation. Now, if you want to understand, I think a statement like that is a pretty good window into the message that Smith is getting from other programs about Georgia and the message that Georgia itself is sending to Mason Smith. The Dogs, you can't deny this, have obviously been on a little bit of a drought as of late when it comes to NFL line and a defensive lineman in the NFL draft. Mason Smith's right about that, and it's no surprise that opposing schools, LSU in particular, probably are kind of pushing that as a negative against Georgia. I think that Georgia's counter response to that is also a pretty good one, and from Mason Smith's own mouth there, you get a hint at that, which is, hey, Trey Scott's just got here. These are his first guys that are going into the NFL draft. Expectations are big this year for a guy like Jordan Davis, who actually could be a pretty high draft pick. I mentioned Trayvon Walker a moment ago as someone who won't be in this upcoming draft, but maybe the following draft if things go well for him. That seeing big production, big performances from these Georgia defensive linemen is probably something that a guy like Mason Smith is looking pretty closely at. So we'll talk more to Jeff Sentell about this in a moment. But I think that quote there from Smith is really pretty interesting. I think it gives you a potential window at what other programs are saying about Georgia for the negative, what Georgia is responding with the positive, and it's one of the reasons why we need to see, if you're a Georgia fan, a big performance this year from the Georgia defensive line, not just for the success that can be produced on the field because of that, but also because of what it might do to impact the class of 2021 there as well. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by Marco's Pizza. And let me tell you something. There is no better way to settle in and enjoy some football this weekend, whether it's on Saturday, Sunday, or heading into Monday night, and with our friends at Marco's Pizza. It is great to have them back here. My family has always loved Marco's Pizza for a simple reason. When you're talking about feeding, myself, my wife, two hungry kids, listen, cost is obviously a big part of that. Marco's takes good care of you on that front. How about medium one-topping pizza, just $6.99? Not only can you enjoy some good food, you can enjoy it for a great price there as well. Go to marcos.com. If you're watching on video, you see marcos.com. Beautiful website. Go to marcos.com. Find out more details about that. They bring the Around the Doghouse to you here today, and they can bring you some great pizza here this weekend. So check them out online, marcos.com, for a whole lot more of our friends at Marco's Pizza. All right, good to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. We'll hear from more Georgia players before we're done on today's program. But for now, let's focus in on what's going on with UGA recruiting. Let's find out about the latest on Mason Smith and a big preview of Brock Vandagriff versus Gunnar Stockton as well. It is a busy conversation with Jeff Sentell. Let's go on the road with him today, assisted by AAA.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
On the road is certainly a reality for Jeff Sentell here today, heading up to the beautiful North Georgia area to watch five-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff of the class of 2021. Of course, a Georgia commit, as everyone knows. Five-star 2022 quarterback Gunnar Stockton to the South Carolina Gamecocks. Great matchup between those two quarterbacks. We'll preview more of that coming up in a moment. But, Jeff, before we get to that, I'm sure you're not surprised. I want to talk a lot about five-star 2021 defensive tackle Mason Smith. I've enjoyed the last two articles that you've written, kind of focusing in on your conversation with Smith. I know you've got a third one, I believe, coming on DawgNation.com today. So as we're on the road assisted by AAA, what do you say we dive right in and get into a little Mason Smith talk here?
Brandon, I kind of figured I'd be in the dentist chair for a root canal of information, and I bet that's what everybody's going to get to hear today.
Well, hopefully it's more enjoyable than a root canal, but yes, indeed. We're going to have you in the spotlight here for a few minutes, and I don't know how much of this you got to hear, probably not very much because you were on the phone, but I pulled one quote in particular from your piece yesterday with Mason Smith because I think that Smith, maybe intentionally, maybe inadvertently, I think he really drew the battle lines for what this recruitment's going to be like going forward. Putting aside for a moment the fact that he's from the state of Louisiana, and obviously, that's a big issue in all of this, just in terms of what the football talk is going to be like. he cites the fact that Georgia hasn't had that defensive lineman drafted in a few years, but also cites the fact that this is Trey Scott's first real bite at that apple. Guys that he's brought into the program getting a chance to be eligible for the draft this year, and obviously you could project ahead to the following draft as well, where Georgia could really reap some big benefits. I mean, to me, Jeff, that highlights the negative recruiting that is going on against Georgia and what Georgia's likely response to all that is, which I think puts the spotlight back on the Georgia defensive line to play well on the field this fall, which frankly they kind of need to do anyway. But to me, that quote in particular, I think really kind of sums up beyond the notion of, can a player leave his home state to come to a place like, the University of Georgia? That quote about, draft drought for defensive linemen, Trey Scott's chance to change that to me feels like it's going to be a factor in this. How much of a factor do you think it's going to be?
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Beautiful day ahead of us today. I think, Brandon, you got to remember, though, let's remember one thing right here. And I guess you might be a little self-conscious, or the DawgNation fan base might be a little bit self-conscious a little bit about, like, how that draft history looks for Georgia defensive lineman Trey Scott. Well, when I talked to Mason Smith about that point, he's like, LSU hasn't really had those first round defensive linemen pop up either. So it's not like that. It's like Georgia's going against Alabama or Clemson here in his mind about what he's being told about putting guys into the league. I think there's a lot of balancing information that maybe all these schools have kind of told Mason Smith about, what they're doing and what their defensive plans look like. You got to remember, Mason Smith knows about Georgia's draft history, but he also knows already about Jordan Davis, set to change that, and he knows about Trayvon Walker as well. He also knows that, LSU's not putting up a ton of guys in the league at his position either. You look through the draft stuff for LSU, and you got to go back a long way to find a first round, second round, third round defensive tackle as well. I think 2014 was the last time that LSU put a first round defensive lineman, defensive tackle type into the league. And, that's not too far removed from when Georgia put a couple of guys in the 2012 draft as well. I think what he likes about Georgia is defensively, he knows Georgia is a notable defense. It's in the top 10, the top 5 every year. And that's something that is really encouraging. But, to me, Brandon, and this is kind of why I set this story up the way it did. Quick disclaimer here. One, I said to myself, I'm not chasing clicks. I'm not chasing headlines. I'm not propping up 5-star guys to just put it out there and get the clicks and get the attention on our website. I told myself I wasn't really going to write anything with sharp teeth about Mason Smith until I thought that Georgia really had a chance to pull him out of the state of Louisiana, and especially Houma, Louisiana. But the way that first story read, folks on the DawgNation forum are like, tell me how you really feel. I'm getting all these PM chats. But for me, you got to look at Mason Smith. Number one, his whole life, he has established a pattern of going against the grain. He sees everybody is a business major. He doesn't want to be a business major. He wants to be, with his 3.7 GPA, wants to go into sports broadcasting. Look at the way he was named, Brandon. They had a family friend that was having a son about the same time, and they were going to name their son Mason. And there was some chatter about, we're going to name our son the same name as our good friends. Our good friend are naming their son, and they compromised and put an extra A in the name. Mason Smith, he's told LSU that stop with the pressure. He's going to commit on his own time, which is really when he announces on his national signing day for early signing day on December the 15th. When he trains and when he works out with a lot of quicks. He doesn't work out with a lot of bigs. I mean, this is just a guy who has established, and we walk through it in his life, a pattern of, he's going to do things his own way. And he doesn't got it like that, like a lot of those boot boys that grew up in Louisiana. I think one of the interesting parts of the narrative here is he didn't grow up a fan of LSU. He didn't grow up dreaming to play for LSU. And I think that's one of those reasons why, with Mason Smith, that things are a little different here than just trying to pull a 5-star out of Louisiana that everyone wants.
So I'll give you a little inside baseball here for a moment. When we do the show every single day, I type up a rundown for graphics to be made, things like that for the show. And for a long time, the processor that I used to publish the rundown would not let me type Mason with 2A. It would autocorrect it every single time. It physically would not allow it to remain Maason. I've now tried to type it so much that it no longer corrects it. So I guess everybody's kind of getting used to the double A, for Mason Smith there, 2A, if you want to call him that. I think that everybody's just getting a little bit more used to that, including my own, I guess, Google Doc, that all of a sudden will now let me type Mason with 2 A's. So that is kind of a unique characteristic for him. I think all of us have grown to get a little bit more used to.
Yeah, and the other thing, Brandon, is he was talking about all those things about how he didn't grow up a fan of LSU, and I think that's big. And probably one of the most important parts of that chapter 1 of our Smith series was, when he started thinking about, the perception and what's going to go along with that. But Mason Smith he's just established himself to me. Like we had that discussion about how hard is it going to be Louisiana, and I was like, all right, Swiss cheese this theory. I want to know if this is exactly how you think. No junior days, no spring game, no back-to-back-to-back, repeated unofficial visits with all your 2021 class to get chummy and grow bonds with. COVID's kind of played defense on all those things. That's like, I was writing that story early in the summer about how, in some ways COVID-19 is kind of keeping Georgia in a lot of races instead of, them getting out-kicked with distance and proximity. Well, with Mason, I went through that whole thing, and I'm like, you're not going to have Tiger Stadium. And he's like, you're pretty much spot on with that. This is a guy, it seems to me, that doesn't want to be hounded. That's why he told LSU, he's like, hey, guys, I'm not going to make a decision until December the 16th, so you should probably stop asking me about it. And they've respected that. They've been considerate of that. And it does set up for a young man. We've always thought, especially with a young man far outside the state of Georgia, where Georgia's going to have to pull a big out-of-state recruiting victory. The longer these things go, and I'm not, dialing up a Monty Rice situation where Monty Rice just showed up at Georgia as an LSU commit and didn't even bother flipping when he had committed during his ceremony to LSU. But, there's so many complexities, and that's probably why I'm writing 3 stories about it. The last one will be all the reasons that Georgia has stacked up to try and wrestle him out of Louisiana. But for me, there's just so many complexities when you've got COVID, when you've got a young man that just want to go about his recruiting walk in his own very unique way, not like what he hears from others. And then you've got the fact that he's got this, great relationship already with some members of the Georgia 2021 class, and also a huge megawatt, 5,000 LED bulb type spotlight recruit in Corey Foreman. But I've heard a lot of recruits tell me in like March, April, May, oh yeah, we're going to go play together. We're going to tear it up. We're going to win natties together. And that always will, Brandon. It always kind of falls by the wayside as each young man makes his own decision. Friends and family, degrees, scheme fit, coach love, all those variables kind of have to align. And usually they get weaker, but it seems like with Smith and Foreman, it gets stronger. And Foreman, who is a very polished communicator, Brandon, he is a guy that told me, I am definitely going to play college football with Corey Foreman. There were no ifs, there were no ands, no buts about it. I mean, if Eddie the Blind Squirrel was conducting that interview and he heard that, Eddie the Blind Squirrel would believe what Mason Smith said with that.
Yeah, we talked about that on yesterday's show. It's a pretty provocative statement, and it sounds like you do, but I want to just follow up on that. Do you take that statement at face value? Because obviously you've been around the block a million times. This is the only time that Mason Smith's ever gone through this, only time Corey Foreman's ever gone through this, that sometimes their feelings may be what they are now, but you have seen the way in which recruits eventually decide that different destinations just make the most sense there. How real do you view that statement to be? No one can doubt Smith's sincerity in saying that he's 100% going to, play with Corey Foreman, but you've also seen players who were sincere that later just facts on the ground kind of changed. So what do you personally make of that?
I think it's true, Brandon. I think this is different. I think it's because these young men talk to each other every day. He calls himself a brother. Mason Smith, even, everybody's wondering. I can't believe, I don't know if anybody ever asked me this directly on the DawgNation forum, but that truck bed picture that everyone's talking about, that first one as it started leaking out from that recruiting weekend. Those names those two faces, everybody's wondering, who's that? Is that this guy? Is that guy? Is that the secret recruiting guy that will remain nameless that's working on as well underneath the radar? Actually, in that big truck bed picture, that's Corey Foreman's two brothers. And you hear Mason Smith chat about those two guys, and you hear him talk about Corey. This seems different, especially with a young man from Houma, Louisiana, and a young man from Corona, California. Like for instance, when they went to Georgia, they visited Georgia together. Neither one of them wanted to leave. Unfortunately, it just wasn't because of the University of Georgia and how good of a five-star host that Brock Vandagriff was. It was because they just liked being around together, hanging out. These guys hung out in the truck bed for like 90 minutes, sweaty, stinky, with gnats and mosquitoes after they'd been trying to fish as well. And then they went back to the next week, and then they hung out together in Baton Rouge. It really seems like these gentlemen are sincere. They're at least sincere in any way that I've ever heard it presented to me before, because not only are they talking like it, but they're certainly acting like it, making these sort of visits during COVID-19 and during the coronavirus, when the degree of difficulty to do so is ratcheted up so high.
We're on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sentell here on our program here today. And by the way, speaking of our friends at AAA, we love them in my household. We've been members there since, I think it's 2004, my wife said. So we've been AAA members now for a really long time. And one of the things that AAA saves me is some worry, peace of mind when it comes to the legendary roadside assistance. My family's on the road without me. I know they're well taken care of in the event that let's face it, flat tires can happen at any point in time. Anything like that can be an issue. If I can't be there to be with them, I know that AAA can take really good care of them. That's one of the ways in which AAA kind of just saves me some worry. But AAA can also save you some money as well, including on your auto insurance. That may be the kind of thing that you're not really aware of. But on average, when you switch and save with AAA, you're talking about a $529 worth of savings there. That's no small amount. So make sure you check that out for yourself. It's AAA.com/auto insurance. That's AAA.com/auto insurance, and you can switch and save today. All right, Jeff, to be true here to the theme of being on the road, I know you're looking forward to being with Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton here tonight. I was very impressed by the Stockton highlights that I saw a week ago, the ones that you shared on social media, and I think tonight's going to be a really fun game. National showcase type deal, ESPNU, between these two quarterbacks. How much are you looking forward to it, and what are you expecting to see?
Yeah, first of all, this is the time of year when everybody starts going up to beautiful Tiger, Georgia, Clayton, Georgia, Raven County, north of the Gorge, to check out the leaves, to check out the foliage. This is clearly, for me, I'm going to say a trek to check out some elite quarterback play. I know this might not pass the sniff test for a lot of folks, but I think the Atlanta Falcons play two games. One of them is against the Bears. One of them is against Seattle this month in the state of Georgia. And I think Georgia Tech hosts UCF. But I think aside from that, and maybe right up there with that Central Florida Tech game, this might be the best display of quarterback play on a field in the state of Georgia this month outside of those two NFL games. I crunched some numbers, and that's part of the story. Brandon, this is so big, I'm going to act like my old days as a high school editor and a high school's reporter. I wrote a big game preview kind of coming out or looking at this game tonight, and here's one thing that just stacks up for me in terms of, man, I don't know how this game's not going to end up something like 55-49 or 45-41. I think Brock Vandagriff has played as a full-time quarterback now. He has played 22 games of high school football. His average night at Prince Avenue Christian as the gunslinger, his teams have seen Vandagriff, whether it's running or throwing, account for an average of 4.3 touchdowns per game. You look at Gunnar Stockton, he's got, I think, 27 career starts as the quarterback at Raven County. He's averaging 4.4 touchdowns per game. You automatically put those guys together, you got 8 touchdowns on the board right there, where it's going to be in the 50s Kind of a defensive coordinator's nightmare. Brock's dad has a defensive coordinator's pedigree. His specialty is that side of the ball. He's the head coach at Prince Avenue Christian. He's a guy that's going to be he's scheming up or trying to find a way to slow down Gunner Stockton tonight. It should be an incredible game for high school football in the state of Georgia. It's at 8 p.m. It's even going to be on ESPNU, where you could see a future leader of the Georgia program going against a future leader of the South Carolina program. I think a lot of folks will tune in and they'll want to see who's winning that individual battle along with that leadership battle for both teams. And I'm going to tell you, this is for a guy that still has to wait a couple more weeks for college football, and I don't even know how much media access photographers and reporters will get inside those SEC stadiums this year. For right now, I'm looking at this game right here as the big piece of chicken for football right now in the state of Georgia.
So I don't even know the rules anymore. Our coaches are not allowed to be there tonight, right? So there's no Mike Bobo. There's no Kirby Smart. These coaches can't be there for this, right? NCAA dead period prevents them from watching this game. Is that true? The honest truth is I don't even really know.
Yeah, Brandon, I gotta brief you a little bit better, man. I can't help you. You're my guy here. I gotta make you sound smart on the air here. So, and it's funny, everybody gets, it's kind of like the illusion or like the jingling keys. Everybody thinking, oh, when can the recruits visit? Oh, when can the recruits visit? And they're worried about big stadiums, having them in the stadium for these big SEC games. Well, the byproduct of the dead period, Brandon, and what it is we're under an NCAA dead period. That means the coaches can't get out either. The coaches can't get out either and go on the road, and you can have, those head coaches on the opposite sidelines and recruiting coordinators. I mean, offensive coordinators and head coaches there, helicoptering in for these big games. I got to tell you, Brendan, I think the state of marriages and the family bonds in the SEC for all these coaches and their staff, they have to be stronger than ever because they have spent 3 years worth of normal family time in 2020 that they normally get in the last 7 months with their families. I mean, every night's kind of game night now. Nobody's on the road. Nobody's going to practices. Totally different, this dead period. It also means, to say that one more time, coaches can't get on the road and visit these high school prospects until that dead period lifts, because dead period is exactly what it is. That is no face-to-face contact on or off campus with the recruit.
Mary Beth's going to get tired of Kirby eventually. She's going to tell him he needs to get back on the road, start recruiting again. He stays around home too much after not being around there. She may tell him she's ready for him to get back on the road again. I know my wife does that to me from time to time. She's like, don't you have somewhere to be right now? You want to give us a break here for a moment? Some of these wives may be doing that with the coaches there as well. Hey, a couple more things real quick.
Brandon, hey, man, let's play a prop bet with all your listeners and viewers right now. Who does everybody think, Brandon, is Who does everybody think has made more dinners at home over the last 7 months? Is it Kirby Smart or is it Brandon Adams? I'd love to see what everybody thinks about that.
If Kirby's made one, I think he's probably made more than I have. Unfortunately, I'm very well taken care of in that regard, and I'm sure the Smart family is much the same way as well. That's a pretty good point. I guess the thing here is there'll be no Kirby popcorn gift part 2 coming with Brock Vandegrift. In other words, that's the thing we really miss out on from not having this. The return of the Kirby popcorn gift, we won't get a chance to see that tonight.
Maybe he needs to FaceTime folks, or maybe he needs to just have it on his social media account, him watching a big Vandegrift touchdown highlight and have him eating popcorn on the couch. I think that would work.
Let me do 2 quick things before we let you go. How much does it matter? I love storylines. I love narratives. How much does it matter which one of these 2 guys shows up as the alpha tonight? We have seen quarterbacks over the course of time enjoy competing against each other. I would say that Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields enjoyed the competition to be the nation's #1 recruit. Stockton and Vandegrift aren't in the same class, but they are in the same state and could eventually be playing against each other on SEC fields as well. How interested are you to see which one of these 2 guys kind of emerges as an alpha on the field tonight? Is that something you're interested in?
I would be disappointed, Brandon. I would be shocked if both of them did not introduce themselves as alphas tonight. There's a game that Prince Avenue Christian played last year, and this was when Brock was coming back from his broken bone in his broken leg, where the final score was 62-57. That game featured Georgia freshman Justin Robinson on the other side of the ball. He played receiver and defensive back for Elka that night on the way to that program's 5th straight state title. I think Brock went for 527 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. So it was an above-average night for Brock Vandegrift. I think Gunnar Stockton's going to do the same thing. I think both of these guys are going to go off. Probably is going to be not which defense rises up 1 or 2 times when the other one doesn't. I don't even think it's going to be who wins the turnover battle. I think it's going to be about, Brandon, who has the ball last. And I think that's what's going to be so thrilling tonight, to see both of these young men perform at their absolute best and try to win try to lead their teams to a win, which is kind of funny. It's only the second week of the season and it's a non-region game, but I think Prince Avenue's Christian schedule has been set up like the SEC. They've got a lot of heavyweights on their out-of-region schedule as they're chasing a Class 1A title. I just expect some brilliant quarterback play tonight from both young men, and for the folks that want to see them throw it around and hit the middle of the field and do those vertical shots, but then also move the chains with about 150 yards rushing apiece. I think this is going to be a stat keeper's dream tonight.
I was going to ask you another question about Vandegrift, but we've talked enough about him. Let me move on for the last thing to mention Jackson Meeks here, commit for Georgia, the wide receiver position. I thought the story that you wrote when he committed really struck the right tone. You know, I like guys who validate themselves with pads on in an 11-on-11 competition in a time in which there wasn't a lot of football being played. The start to Meek's senior year was incredible. I understand he's, I guess, dealt with some injuries previous, to this in his career. So maybe this is a player that truly is kind of coming into his own now that he's fully healthy. Big numbers against a Hoover program obviously gets your attention on that. Phoenix City is a place that's produced a lot of top-flight receivers in recent years. It seems like there's a lot to like about Jackson Meeks, despite the fact that his current rating is probably not, what we're used to for Georgia commits as of late, but Meeks' actual game performances have been about as good as anything you could ever expect, right?
Yeah, Brandon, I think the ratings now, they'll have a market correction. I think he's the number 1,100 player in the country right now, but everybody's rating him off of his 2019 season when he played sparingly behind a couple of really good seniors, including a guy that went on to Clemson and E.J. Williams. He was only about 80%. He was wearing a knee brace. I see a lot of misinformation out there about Jackson Meeks. He actually suffered his injury as a sophomore, and that was in Game 4 of his sophomore year. And then he was, he's kind of like in the Dominic Blaylock crowd. He was back running full speed and cutting within like 3 or 4 months, 5 months. But it did take him a while to get all that explosion back, and he did still, as a precaution, play all last year with a knee brace, likely because he didn't really need to rush it with some really experienced receivers at Central Phoenix. But I like this. Here's what I like the most about Jackson Meeks. This is a pure game film 2020 evaluation. Nothing camps involved, nothing seeing him a year and a half ago is involved. Jackson Meeks got his offer from the University of Georgia on August the 25th. And I bet you it might have taken 2 weeks for him to commit, but it was almost in my mind's eye a certainty that he was going to end up a Bulldog after about maybe 6 or 7 days. It was just a formality for him to get everything together after that to make his commitment. Jackson Meeks is the guy, 6'3", 205, and you want to talk about trust your position coach and trust your recruiter, much in the same way everybody saw Trey Scott go out and get Jordan Davis, a 3-star defensive tackle, in that 2018 class. That's what it's going to be like this year with receivers for Georgia and Cortez Hankton. I think of Georgia's 4 lowest rated commitments this year, they only have 4 3-stars. 2 of those are wide receivers, and these are guys that Hankton has just eyeballed and picked out as guys he needs to fill in what Georgia won't have through attrition and graduation. I mean, these guys are kind of Pickens clones, Pickens replacement, Pickens body type, along with a guy like Justin Robinson. And I think Georgia has the ability to only go 2 receivers this year, especially because they picked up 5 very, very good ones in the 2020 class. All
right, Jeff, good stuff. Gunnar Stockton versus Brock Vandegrift tonight should be a ton of fun. Thanks for being here on the road, assisted by AAA. We will look forward to reading a lot from you at DawgNation.com and talking to you back here again on our program very soon as well.
All right, guys. Now, don't be mad at me and my buddy Connor if the highlight reel is like 8 minutes long tonight from this game, because that's just what these young men are going to provide.
Should be good.
The Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So one of the things I like to do from time to time is check in on the enemy message boards. Jeff talking about Jackson Meeks there, the latest Georgia commit, the wide receiver position. There's already a lot of chatter on some of the enemy message boards that Meeks is about to get a Georgia bump. I think it's potentially justifiable in his recruiting ranking based on the way that he has played, based on the fact that he was at one point hobbled, slowed down because of an injury, maybe not getting a true evaluation of him as a prospect because of that. So Meek seems likely for a big recruiting bump here eventually. Enemy fans going to call it a Georgia bump, and that should be fun to watch the reaction to all of that. Let's get ready to go our SEC through here, and as we do that, let me talk to you about my friends at Classic City Lager here for a moment. Creature Comforts presents it to you. I love Classic City Lager. It's kind of a great weekend beer, right? It's easy drinking. It's got a great taste. It's a crisp taste. It's also a great way to support kind of an Athens original. You love the Classic City, you'll love Creature Comforts Classic City Lager. It's available in 6 and 12-pack cans. Whatever retailer you go to, you can find Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts there. And if you don't find it, tell them you want to see it there, and they'll make sure they get it for you, and you can really enjoy that. You're settling in for some football this weekend. I know I'm looking forward to that. It's one of the benefits of Georgia starting a little later. There's more time to watch football here this weekend, and settling in with some Classic City Lager is certainly a great way to do that. Enjoy the great taste. Enjoy the good fun. Think about Athens while you're doing it. If you can't be in the Classic City this weekend, it's a great way to bring the Classic City to you. Creature Comforts Classic City Lager. Pick it up today wherever you do your shopping. All right, speaking of SEC fans being mad, there is about to be an absolute knockdown dragout in the SEC. In a roundabout way, it's been started by Florida. Let me show you this tweet from Andy Staples, of course, from The Athletic, and I sympathize with Andy on this. Let me read his line first, and then we'll get to the news. He says, when the youngsters post the news to their Instagram story, it's hard for us olds to find it. I've been there a million times, especially when it comes to recruits. The Instagram story disappears after 24 hours, so therefore, if somebody doesn't screenshot it, I never see it. But Staples goes on to say that Justin Shorter, the Penn State to Florida transfer, says he's got his waiver to play immediately. And you see there from, if you're watching on video anyway, from Shorter's Instagram story, he says, I finally got the waiver. It's go time. Shorter, as many of you know, is a former 5-star receiver that signed with Penn State, did not do big things with the Nittany Lions, came to Florida, has been granted eligibility. Now, this has been a story for Florida as of late. They have gone out and gotten a lot of transfer players, and in some cases, those guys have played well for them. Van Jefferson, certainly an example of that. Dan Mullen can't recruit, so he has made up for that by working the transfer market. It's very interesting how many of Florida's top players this year will be former elite signees of other programs. Obviously, you know Brenton Cox on the defensive side of the ball. That's a former 5-star from Georgia. Lorenzo Lingard, who would seem poised to factor heavily in the Florida running game, former 5-star running back signing in Miami, and now Shorter from Penn State. So Florida gets some help here. They get the eligibility decision to work their favor when it comes to Justin Shorter, according to Shorter's own Instagram story. Now let me transition over to Tennessee and Cade Mays here for a moment, because upon hearing the Shorter news, Vols fans are about to lose their mind because they got denied on Cade Mays. Now, I've said a million times before, you know, whether it be the actual letter of the rules themselves, which make it pretty difficult for a guy like Mays to be eligible, or just the spirit of those rules, Cade Mays not being eligible at Tennessee, I think, is an example of justice. I'm glad he's not eligible. I would be a little bit upset if Georgia, made it easier for him to be eligible there. But with Shorter getting the nod at Florida, Tennessee fans going to even be more upset than ever before about this. I know Mike Griffith wrote about this at DawgNation.com yesterday, citing the lawyer for Mays. There's something I want to point out for this. This is Greg Isaacs, an attorney, writing on Twitter that the request to consider Cade Mays, or should say reconsider Cade Mays' request for a transfer waiver with the NCAA has been filed. Cade is an exceptional young man and student athlete, the attorney says, came home to East Tennessee to be with his family based on his environment at the prior institution. So here's what I think is funny, and by the way, he tags a U.S. representative. Can I see that tweet on the screen one more time? Because I want people who are watching on video to see this. In the span of 280 characters, Greg Isaacs, who's supposed to be a high-powered attorney, and my gosh, he's photographed wearing a pocket square on his Twitter avatar here, he misspells the word Tennessee and has a typo 4 words later to BB with his family. So I'm not really quite sure how good Isaacs, the Mays attorney, is going to be at keeping the the T's crossed and the I's dotted for Caden May's legal case when he can't even construct a tweet without 2 errors over the span of 280 characters. But the point here is that with Shorter getting the nod at Florida, May's getting turned down at Tennessee is only going to stir the pot even more on that. And when you start thinking about what's going on at Ole Miss with a guy like Otis Reese from Georgia, who they haven't heard from at all, and that's always the most controversial thing about the NCAA. It's not who they grant eligibility to and who they don't. It's who they choose to even rule on. I mean, people have joked in the past, they just sort of spin a wheel and pick like one person every few weeks or something like that. That's certainly the way it seems in some respects. So the Shorter news at Florida, and it may help the Gators, even though Shorter himself was not a huge player for Penn State, is going to set off a bunch of dominoes around the rest of the SEC, and will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, in the time we have left in today's show, I'm going to try to do this kind of fast. I want to try to run through a few other stories from the week we haven't had a chance to talk about that I think are kind of fun. We'll even hear from a couple of Georgia players before we're done. Let me start with the fun war of words yesterday between Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart. I think this was all in fun. Related to golf, Pruitt took the jab at Smart. So David Ubben, who covers Tennessee, here's the quote from him on that. Every time I've played golf with Kirby Smart, he's the only guy who finds his ball in the woods, always. A little bit of a suggestion that Kirby may be cheating at golf. I think Pruitt means this as a joke. It certainly gets a laugh, and it gets kind of a response from Kirby, which Kirby doesn't always do, but he has some fun with Pruitt coming back here saying, for the record, I don't play golf with 25-plus handicap golfers. So good job by Kirby coming back at Pruitt on this. I think Kirby's kind of, in addition to being a man, he's kind of a guy, if you get what I'm saying on this. Like, there are some coaches who I don't think are comfortable in their own skin. They can't joke. They just don't have the ability to joke. I think that Dan Mullen's one of those guys. I think that Gus Malzahn, in certain respects, is kind of one of those guys. But there are some coaches in the SEC who are just kind of guys. They can bust chops. They can go back and forth a little bit. I think Kirby is one of those guys. As a Georgia fan, I think that kind of works. You can read more of that story at DawgNation.com, but pretty funny stuff all the way around. Kirby zinging back at Pruitt after Pruitt suggesting he cheats at golf. Let me tell you something. Those are fighting words right there. And good job by Kirby coming back on that. Speaking of funny, last year in the NFL playoffs, McCole Hardman, every single week wore like a very impressive outfit. He dressed up as Maverick from Top Gun one time. He was like, LL Cool J at one point in time. He just sort of dressing up as, or maybe it was Run DMC, I'm sorry. Just dressing up as a bunch of, characters, a lot of cool outfits, things like that. Well, last night, at least in terms of the humorous category, he may have topped them all. Radio podcast, I apologize. You're not going to be able to see this. But Hardman shows up at Arrowhead Stadium for the first game. He's got his pajamas on. He's got his slippers on, big giant teddy bear, kind of house coat on there as well. He's also rocking the mask there, too. So McCole Hardman, who's become quite a character at the NFL level, keeping that up again when it comes to the outfit last night. Really good stuff from him all the way around. All right, a couple more things here real quick. We had a chance earlier in the show to hear from Georgia running back James Cook. We had a chance to hear from Georgia defensive lineman Trayvon Walker. They weren't the only players that spoke to the media this week. I thought that Ben Cleveland, veteran, back as the starter at right guard, thought he had some pretty good things to say about the Georgia offensive line. If you're a little concerned about where this group is heading for the upcoming year, I thought Cleveland gave you some pretty good stuff on that. This was from him. Let me let you hear it.
I'm definitely very, pleasantly surprised as to where we've ended up so far. It was kind of difficult not having a spring ball, stuff like that. So, it really put a lot of, stress on all of us to kind of learn this new offense and pick up on everything, in a lot shorter amount of time than what we would normally have. But, I think our guys have handled it extremely well, and we've been progressing every single day. So, I think we're way ahead where most people think we should be right now.
I think that's good stuff from Cleveland. First of all, I think his veteran presence will matter. I think Cleveland's a good player. I think Georgia will be glad to have him this year. And for an offense that right now seems to be very much still a work in progress, hearing Cleveland, who's been around the block a couple times, and he's seen some good offensive lines at Georgia, saying this would maybe a little further ahead of where you might think. I think for the Georgia fan, you ought to take that as a pretty good news. So pretty good stuff from Cleveland there. I was also excited this week to get a chance to hear from Georgia cornerback Tyson Campbell, a guy who I still think has a chance to be a very good player at Georgia. Campbell kind of coming into his own, ready for even bigger performance here in 2020. We had a chance to hear from him a little bit this week, too.
I think, I matured so much as a player, coming here being young, not really knowing the defense. But as, the coaches, developed us, defense and, experience in the game, I've been able to, develop mentally, as far as getting my IQ in football better and also becoming stronger, faster, the whole 9 yards of being a better athlete.
This is an incredibly deep Georgia secondary. Incredibly deep Georgia secondary, one that I have big expectations for this year, and I think that Campbell's a big part of that. I think he was playing better than some people realized near the end of last year, and him stepping up and doing some big things this year, I think are also – it's just going to be really fun to watch all of this occur and all this take place. Get a chance to hear from him here this week. Let me be serious just for a moment before we do our Gator Hater update and get out the door. Obviously, 19 years ago today was September 11th, 2001, a date that changed all of our lives forever for those of us who experienced it. And yet, when I think back on this all these years later, I've got an incredible sense of pride in my country for how we overcame the issues that we were dealing with then, the fact that we grew, became better as a country because of that. It's inspiring to think about what we're still dealing with today. For those who gave their life in support of our country then, the debt of gratitude we owe, boy, it's just as big as ever, and certainly we think about that here today, and it's just a great, great thing to be able to think about, and an awesome, awesome privilege that we get to have to live the life that we get to enjoy because of the people like that, first responders, military people, everything else. So just an incredible, incredible debt of gratitude that we all pay and we think about on the way out the door here. And I'll also now clumsily transition to our Gator Hater Updater and remind you that it's been 1,413 days since those lousy, stinking Gators beating the Georgia Bulldogs. You have a great weekend. Enjoy the freedom that our country gets a chance to enjoy here this weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. We appreciate all of you being with us, and we appreciate our friends at R.S. Andrews making it possible. I talked to Dari here this week. We're on our way back with the R.S. Andrews Go With The Flow here this season as well. Can't wait to be doing that. Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews is going to be a big part of that, so that's going to be fun. But it's going to be fun here for a couple of minutes, too, with your comments. We got time for like 5-10 good minutes on those. We'll try to run through this kind of quickly, and we will get ready to get you on your way towards a weekend. So let me I'll do YouTube first today, then I'll go Facebook after that. Andrew Hughes says, has JT Daniels been fully cleared? As of what Kirby Smart said on Saturday, that hasn't taken place yet. Now, this is one of those things that, when it does take place, Georgia won't necessarily come out and make a big announcement about it. It'll just sort of occur, and then maybe, Kirby Smart will finally say that it has. But as of the last time Smart spoke, and there's been no update to that, JT Daniels still not fully cleared, but the expectation is that he will be. Smart himself even said that he expects that he will be, but it officially, at least of the last time Kirby Smart spoke, had not taken place yet. Lance Freeman says, will Vandagriff win the starting quarterback job in 2021 in Georgia? I would say he certainly has a chance to, no matter which quarterback's on the roster. I think Vandagriff's a guy you got to take pretty seriously there. Tick on YouTube says, this is Florida's year, quote. Yeah, I've heard that before, and yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I think that Florida is probably good. I think that there is still a gap between Georgia and Florida that they can't do much to remedy. So this may be another one of those years in which Florida may be better than most everybody else. I mean, you got to give them credit the last couple of years. They have kind of found a way to do that. So, but in terms of closing the gap against Georgia, no, I don't really see that happening. Green Soldier says, first of all, thanks for the kind words. He also mentioned some praise for Dwan Mathis. Yeah, you're hearing some of that, kind of chatter online last couple of days. Maybe not a great scrimmage on Saturday for Mathis, but better practices maybe this week. There's some online chatter about that a little bit. I just don't know what to make of it. I just don't. I mean, I don't care how good anyone's sourcing is. There is still a degree to which when you're taking information that someone's giving to you that they saw you didn't, there is still a filter on that, right? And so I just don't know. I don't know what to make of what I'm hearing about JT Daniels, and I don't know what to make of what I'm hearing about Dwan Mathis. I just don't know. I do think it's interesting that supposedly Daniels and Jamie Newman were in a neck-and-neck battle, and then Newman's gone, and it's sort of miraculously now Daniels and Mathis in a neck-and-neck battle. It seems like a lot of this kind of stuff is constructed to make a neck-and-neck battle between whoever it is that's competing. So, I guess read into that what you will. I just don't know what to make of this. I just don't. Jay Shipe says, are you still high on Texas A&M this year? Are you calming down and waiting to see if they beat a ranked team one year? Obviously they've got to get it done against ranked competition, but, they've beaten LSU as recently as 2018. So, it's not like they have no big wins in the Jimbo Fisher era. And if you're looking at a second SEC team to make the college football playoff, I would not discount Texas A&M's chances of doing that. I really wouldn't. Darian Davis says, any chance of black uniforms in Tuscaloosa? I don't think they'll let Georgia do that because Alabama will be in its crimson, a little bit too similar with the dark color there. But I'd love to see the black jerseys come out this year for sure. Huck Finn says Florida has far superior wide receivers than UGA. So Huck, staying true to his brand here for a moment. Green Soldier on the subject of wide receivers a year ago. Yeah, obviously, for Georgia, that's still kind of a work in progress. Scott Harris says, how do you feel about team leadership this year? It seems better than last year to me. Yeah, certainly I've got every reason to believe it's going to be pretty good. Obviously, losing Andrew Thomas is a big loss for your leadership on offense. Losing J.R. Reed's a big loss for leadership on your defense. But, I think that, look, one of the things that I think that Georgia does well is it cultivates leadership, and that's a good thing. But there's also a handful of players who just kind of have that gene already. It seems like Jamari Salyer's one of those guys, and therefore it's really good to have him. It seems like Monty Rice is one of those guys, and Monty Rice in kind of different position but similar role, in a role like what J.R. Reed was in a year ago. Monty Rice is one of those guys that if you ever get a chance to interview him, you just believe everything he says. He just is such a believable speaker. He speaks with like a passion, right? It just comes from the heart from him. And like whatever he said, you'd be likely to believe it just because he just got, some credibility with the way that he carries himself. And so, yeah, guys like that, I would say, are probably put Georgia in pretty good shape. And this is one of those years where leadership's going to matter. The phrase that Will Muschamp used a few weeks ago kind of rattles around in my head, that players are going to have to be a little comfortable this year being bored. They're going to be asked to stay away from people, and in some cases maybe that means staying away from girls, which is a hard thing for good-looking young men to want to do. Leadership, keeping them focused. One of the things I worry about for across college football, not just at Georgia, but do opt-outs during the season become a thing? And I hate to even put this out in the universe because I certainly hope it doesn't happen, but the grind of a season is tough. I think it's just a fact that practice just kind of sucks. It's hard. It's physical. It's, for a place like Georgia, maybe even more challenging the games because there's no one there to cheer you on. There's no glory. It's just a grind. And, leadership to keep guys focused during the season, once it gets kind of, we all know what it feels like to get kind of burned out, right? You go through a period of hard work and you just don't have as much mental focus at the end. You don't have as much gas in the tank anymore. We all know what that feels like. So Georgia's leadership making sure that those guys just stick with it for a few more weeks. It's a grind, but it's also a sprint. It'll be over before you know it. It's, the days are long, but the months themselves will be short. So, you do need that leadership, and I think that Georgia cultivates that in some respects, but it also has identified some guys that just sort of have that naturally. Jamari, Monty, guys like that. Green Soldier also mentioned Kendall Milton, kind of room to grow for him, and I think that's probably a pretty good way to say that. I do. I think that it's one of the reasons why I think that James Cook is so important, because if Kendall really is slowed down, and honestly none of us really know, it's hard to tell from what Del McGee said the other day, but if he really is slowed down, then you're going to need somebody else to even fill in more of a void, get more carries. And if James Cook's able to do that, that'd be great. Matt Rukvina, this is a really interesting point. He says, it's amazing to think we should have already played Virginia and looking ahead to Alabama in 8 days. It is crazy, right? It's just crazy. It's almost hard for me to even take my mind back to a time in which, we were expecting Georgia to play 12 games. Noah Sheldon says Florida is nothing special. They are overrated and irrelevant. You love to hear that from Noah. Let's see what else. Dion Ware says, I don't want that smoke. I don't want that smoke on what? Shelton Tucker says, I don't think I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the quarterback problem. We talked about quarterbacks a bunch. I just figured it may be time to talk about something else today. I mean, I will invite you to check out what I did yesterday for DN90 on this. I wrote it at DawgNation.com. I put it on video as well. The only problem I see for Georgia quarterbacks is the level of hype that surrounds these guys. You know, and this is true for Jamie Newman, who I did assume was going to be the Georgia starter, but some of the hype that kind of built around him was just sort of like, what are we doing? Why is there so much of this? And then Newman leaves and immediately gets transferred over to a guy like, JT Daniels, as if nothing had, you just changed the name and kept the same narrative going. But, you assume that it's a problem for Georgia quarterback. I don't know if it's a problem or not. I am not fully confident that Georgia's going to find the quarterback that it needs. I hope that it does, whether it's Mathis, whether it's, Daniels or whoever else. But just given the uncertainty around Daniels, given the fact that Mathis hasn't played, you want to bring in Stetson Bennett, Carson Beck into this conversation. The storyline doesn't really change. Those are uncertain names as well. I think this quarterback competition is I don't know what to make of it, I guess is the point that I'm getting to here. I don't know what to make of it, but to assume that it's a problem, I don't know about that. There's a chance Georgia still has a very good quarterback. We could certainly see that playing out. I think for the people who, only want to hear that Georgia's going to have a great quarterback, and whether it's this guy or that guy, I can guarantee he's going to be great. I can't make that promise to you. Anybody who does try to make that promise to you is lying to you to try to take advantage of. But there's obviously still a chance this team has a good quarterback, and we can talk about it as much as you want. Steve Highland says Bennett's a no for me. Let the young guys, young gun shine. And Steve, so far at practice, that's the sense that you get is they know what they have in Stetson Bennett, and they are trying to give a lot more attention to the other guys as a way of finding out what they really bring to the table. That's the one consistent week after week is they're giving more of the key snaps over to Mathis and to Beck and to Daniels and I guess even at one point Newman, because it seems like they feel like they already know what they have with Bennett. Dion Ware says none of us know what to make of it. Yeah, I guess I think that's a good way to say it, Dion. And I guess I'm just kind of okay with that. I'm okay to let it play out. There's a chance that Georgia has a very good quarterback. There's a chance that Georgia struggles at quarterback again. I think it's one of the reasons last year Georgia wasn't a national championship contender, did not get elite play from the quarterback position. People can say that it was helped by the wide receivers. That's true. I think the overall offensive game plan put the quarterback in a very tough spot a year ago. I think it was a deficient game plan. That's true there as well. But ultimately, people don't want to hear about the birth pains. They just want to see the baby. And last year, the Georgia offense did not get it done. So that's still a little bit of a hangover that exists for this program moving into 2020, for sure. Joel Moody says favorite restaurant for chicken. I like a lot of them. I'm also not going to give a free plug away, but I will say this: I like a different. We're talking about fast food chicken. I like a different one for breakfast, a different one for lunch, and there's one in particular I love for breakfast, and there's a different one I would prefer for lunch. Let's see what else. Shelton Tucker says we'll know after Arkansas who starts against Auburn at home, then we'll move on. Yeah, I mean, I suggest this, I think it was yesterday's show, that maybe Georgia plays both these guys, Daniels and Mathis. Maybe all of this is a smokescreen. I guess that's part of this in my mind, too, is that, sometimes some of this kind of stuff feels like intentional, smokescreen. Maybe some of that is the case. Georgia actually only plays one of these guys against Arkansas. It's going to make the first game worth tuning in to see, for sure. And one way or another, you got to have, look, I think that Georgia could beat Arkansas with a Wildcat quarterback. You pick you put James Cook at running back. let them just play wild dog for 60 minutes. You could probably beat Arkansas. But against Auburn, you got to have a signal caller. You got to have quarterback settled by Auburn. I would say that Shelton's probably right about that, and maybe they do. Randy Hall mentioned Notori Johnson. Yeah, Notori is a guy that I really, really like. And look, it's hard to get playing time on the Georgia offensive line because even with all the departures, it's still a really deep unit. But Notori, I said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I guess this year it's going to be different because there'll be fewer fans in the stands. But when these guys go through their senior night, when these guys that could have turned tail and run, and, they could have left the program, but they didn't. They stayed here. They fought. They scratched. They clawed. They tried everything. Notori's position switched. He switched to defensive line. Then he switched back to offensive line for the bowl game last year. And now, I guess maybe he's mostly an offensive lineman again, but I know there was some talk he might still try to contribute on the defensive line too. When you kind of go, back and forth like that, it's just an example of him trying to do everything he can to be on the field and to, make the most of his opportunity. I just think Notori ought to get a huge ovation when his career at Georgia's finally done because of how hard he's worked to do that. Tori Inslee mentioning Mrs. Winters. Are there still any Mrs. Winters left? Aren't they all closed? I used to love a Mrs. Winters breakfast biscuit, but aren't they all closed now? Maybe you got some intel that I don't know. But I used to Hugh Nash says chicken places have to pay for BA's endorsement. Yeah, we're not giving away for free around here. I got young kids, hungry mouths. A couple more. We got to get ready to go. Randy Hall says your predicted record for the Dogs this year. I'll go 9-1. I know yesterday on Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, there's some people in the comment section who were watching the show live who thought that none of us, Mike, Jeff, Connor, or me, were, giving Georgia enough credit. But honestly, I don't think anybody's going 10-0 in the SEC this year. I don't think Alabama is. I don't think Georgia is. I think that I think it's going to be a really, really hard thing to do this year. And so if Georgia goes 9-1 against an all SEC schedule, given the schedule that it is, boy, and listen, maybe there's a chance I'm wrong. Maybe by week 4, week 5, you kind of settle in here and you just see, teams handling their business, and maybe Georgia will be one of those teams. But I think that 9-1 is a great record for Georgia. I think it'll be the best record in the SEC. And I think you can put it right up there with anything that Georgia has ever done in any regular season to go 9-1 against this schedule. It's not even a particular game that would concern me, although Alabama on the road is clearly the toughest. But it's also the grind of having to play. Georgia has won SEC games on 4 consecutive weeks, a couple of times in the Kirby Smart era. But Georgia's never won SEC games on 5 consecutive Saturdays thus far during the Kirby Smart era. The SEC schedule typically just doesn't ask you to do that. This year it will. And the stat people, the people that kind of, crunch the numbers for a living, they'll tell you that, after 5 straight games, 6 straight games, and a couple of teams in the SEC, not Georgia, but a couple of teams this year will be asked to play 6 straight games, you do see a measurable reduction in performance in your efficiency numbers. They do go down after that many consecutive games. So it's the grind of the SEC schedule that I think will eventually catch up with some teams. But I do view 9-1 as a possibility and the most likely outcome. Jan Armistead, this is a good point. She says, we may not know if DJ is cleared until he shows up starting a game. Yeah, obviously that would be pretty typical Kirby. Hugh Nash says, oh God, BA don't. I don't know what I did. I'm not sure what I did there. Oh, y'all think I gave too many comments to Shelton? I'm sorry. Philip Jordan Wells referencing one of my favorite Krusty the Clown lines. If this is anybody other than Steve Allen, you stole my bit. Brian Williamson says, when is the prediction show? We're going to start that the first week of the season for Georgia, so not next week, but the week after that. And thanks for asking. I appreciate that. All right, a couple more. We're going to get ready to go. Boy, it got late fast, didn't it? Belton Johnson representing Mama's Boy in Athens. Yeah, people love that for sure. I like this from Steve Highline. He says 10-1 with an SEC championship is the lowest of expectations. Boy, you love that. Michael Webb says there is still a Mrs. Winters on Fulton Industrial Boulevard in Atlanta. That is very interesting information. I used to love Mrs. Winters. Very, very interesting information. And I'll give them a free plug because I don't know how much advertising they're still able to do. So, shout out to our friends there. Pete Williams. Okay, there you go. He's kind of bringing in some stuff. Good to know. All right. Randy Hall reminds us we still got to do our fan of the month, and we're going to figure out a way to do that at some point in time. Randy Hall is good enough to be patient with us on that. Thank you very much. Jalen Jackson asks a good question. He says, do you think Dwan Mathis gives us the best chance to beat Alabama? They have historically struggled with dual threat guys. I can certainly see a case for that. I thought that Jamie Newman increased Georgia's chances of beating Alabama, and maybe you said the same thing about Dwan Mathis as well, because Mathis does have a strong arm, and he does have the elusiveness. Because to me, it's not just the stuff with your legs. It's also the fact that you got to take those big home run shots at some point in time, and I think that Mathis is probably good at that part of it too. He's got a strong arm. So I can understand where you're coming from on that. A role for Dwan Mathis in that game, not just to be a designated runner, someone that does run, of course, because I think you're right. You know, you think about the way that mobile quarterbacks have hampered Alabama in the past, but also you've just got to take some big shots down the field. You've just got to do that. That's one of the things that Newman was good at. And to beat Alabama, you got to go for home runs. And you may strike out, and if you do, hey, shake their hand and move on, get ready to play them again, hopefully in December. But you go on the road, win a game like that, you got to swing for the fences a couple of times. And that's what Newman would have been good at. That may be what JT Daniels is good at now. All right, we got to get ready to go. Kevin Wynn, we'll finish with this. He says, I think the UGA defense this year has a chance to be legendary. Am I the only one? No, Kevin, I don't. I think legendary is a fun way to think about that. And I think guys like Mason Smith, that we talked about with Jeff Sentell a lot, are going to be watching in to see that. Legendary means some of these individual names take that next step. Trayvon, Nolan, Nakobe, deep secondary. I mean, it was just fun this week to even get a chance to hear from a guy like Tyson Campbell, who himself is one of these, potential wow factor guys, just kind of in the mix there, kind of in the fold there. I can't wait to see who emerges. I can't wait to see how Georgia, moves these pieces around the board. It should be really fun to see, and it's obviously great fun to talk to all of you about it here on our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. As we get ready to leave, I'll also remind you to make sure you check out the AJC at ajc.com. As we said before, September 11th brings back a lot of memories for a lot of people. Remembrances online at ajc.com today. You can read about all of that and just really appreciate, how we've grown as a country in the last 19 years, the way that we've moved on was a terrible tragedy. And listen, some things in life are enemies to be confronted. Some things in life are just conditions to be endured. Maybe what we're dealing with now is more of the latter. But either way, the strength of America was on display after September 11th. And I'm proud of my country, and I'm proud of the first responders and the military folks who, I mean, my gosh, it's almost a shame that it takes something like that to make sometimes people like me who get busy and get self-absorbed, things like that, something like that to really get us to really see, the people that are putting their lives in the line to sacrifice, for us on a daily basis. But that was a day when the best of America was on display for sure, even though enemies maybe intended the worst. So, just incredible to think about here. And you can read more about that online at ajc.com. Also, upcoming weekend stuff, Falcons season opener against the Seattle Seahawks. You can read about that online as well at ajc.com as we head towards a big football weekend. So enjoy all of that. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Huge thanks for being here as part of the R.S. Andrews Cooldown as well. Check them out online for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll see you back here on Monday, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.